Hey guys! Tonight we slip down a candlelit hallway of portraits, none smiling, all strangely familiar where every face looks like a cousin you wouldn't swipe right on. You're tracing a legacy carved into bone, where love stories were locked inside the family tree and the branches kept folding in on themselves. The result, a jaw so twisted it needed its own throne room. You probably won't survive this, but that's okay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Sister, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in front of a marble bust. It's Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. His lipless mouth juts out like it's trying to escape his skull, and his chin, well, is not so much a chin as it is a monument to centuries of incest. His family didn't just marry their cousins, they looped the gene pool into a Mobius strip. The Habsburg jaw, as it's famously known, wasn't just a joke, it was a warning sign. You blink, his gaze doesn't follow, but you swear the room just got colder. See, the Habsburgs were obsessed with purity. Not spiritual purity, genetic purity. Let none but Habsburgs marry Habsburgs. They basically said, and they did, over and over. A family tree that looked more like a wreath. One emperor even married his niece. Twice removed, nope. First-degree niece. That's not genealogy. That's origami. And Charles II, he was the final product of 200 years of playing Jenga with chromosomes. He couldn't chew properly. He couldn't speak clearly. He couldn't father children. In fact, historians still argue whether he even understood the concept of reproduction at all. Some say he was mentally challenged. Others think he was just extremely sheltered, Either way, he was treated more like a relic than a ruler guarded night and day by monks and wet nurses into adulthood. You hear a faint clink of goblets. You're at one of the infamous Habsburg banquets, where the family dines with itself literally and genetically. They toast to their own superiority, even as one cousin drools into his mutton and another has to be helped to chew. It would be funny if it weren't so tragically claustrophobic. You can't escape the feeling that you've entered a haunted dollhouse. Mainstream history books will tell you Charles ruled from 1665 to 1700. What they leave out is the surreal detail he once believed he was bewitched, cursed by black magic. It got so serious that exorcisms were performed. Yes, multiple. On a king. While still on the throne, imagine your entire court watching you foam at the mouth while a priest yells Latin over your royal slippers. And if you're waiting for a happy ending, don't. When Charles died, he left no heirs, because he physically couldn't. His autopsy noted he had a heart the size of a peppercorn, just one testicle, and a head full of fluid. It's a little-known medical tidbit, but it paints the full picture of a dynasty that collapsed not by war, but by biology. You pull back now, floating through tapestries stitched with golden lions and eagles. Every crest is a badge of honour. Every marriage a stitch in the same old wound. The Habsburgs weren't just marrying cousins, they were bottling insanity and passing it down like wine. A servant whispers a family secret. Charles's great-great-grandfather was also his great-uncle. You don't know whether to laugh or cry, but this isn't just Charles's story. The jaw, that legendary protrusion, shows up again and again. Emperor Maximilian, I had it, though milder. So did Philip II of Spain. In portraits, they all try to look stoic, but once you know what to look for, it's everywhere: the long lower face, the jutting chin, the sleepy, heavy-lidded eyes. You realise these weren't royal portraits. They were genetic mugshots. And yet, they saw it as beauty, noble, elongated, divine. To them, your average farmer's face looked pedestrian. The joke's on them that peasants' kids could probably pronounce banana. One fringe theory whispered by esoteric historians, is that the Habsburg saw deformity as a divine marker, that the suffering it caused brought them closer to God. There's no hard proof, but in court sermons and letters, they speak of pain with something bordering on spiritual pride. It's martyrdom disguised as monarchy. You drift past a baby cradle. It's empty now, but you hear echoes of coughing, of nurses soothing royal infants born too early, too frail. Half of them wouldn't make it past 5. The other half were often too weak to fight. Rule, or, date someone outside their immediate gene pool, but somehow the dynasty lumbered on. Charles's reign ended with the War of the Spanish Succession, a fancy way of saying, this inbred king died, and now everyone wants his stuff. It was less a passing of the crown and more a family garage sale gone international. And yet, through all this, the Habsburgs left us palaces, and laws. Even Mozart got his royal patronage from this mess of a lineage. Proof that beautiful things can sprout from warped roots. As you float above Madrid's El Escorial, where Charles is buried, you wonder how many of these ancestors ever realised what they'd done to themselves. Did they know? Did they care? Or was the royal echo chamber so loud that no one noticed the ticking genetic time bomb? The candles flicker. Your reflection in the stone floor has a suspiciously long jawline. You're in a tower. Stone. Dark. No window wide enough to climb through, not that you'd want to. Smells of candle wax and something else, something old. Like wilted roses. A woman sits on the edge of a cold bed, rocking slowly. Her name is Joanna, but history remembers her as Juana la Loca Joanna the Mad. And the madness, it's not entirely hers. You edge closer, careful not to startle her. She's humming, clutching something close to her chest, a length of velvet. Stained, not velvet. A shroud. You realise you're not in a prison. You're in a tomb dressed up as a bedroom. Juana's husband is dead, but she keeps him close. Too close. She carries his body from castle to castle for months after he dies, refusing to bury him. At night, she opens the casket to lie beside him. Courtroomers call it romantic. Others say repulsive. But nobody calls it healthy. You lean against a damp wall, trying to piece it together. Juana, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the same power couple who funded Columbus, was supposed to be a link between Spain and the Habsburgs. That meant her marriage to Philip the Handsome wasn't just strategic. It was a collision between two already tightly wound bloodlines. A double helix that had lost its spiral and started tying itself in knots. Philip was Juana's second cousin, listeners. Not bad by royal standards, but the blood math stacked like unstable bricks. Their son, none other than Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. You're starting to see a pattern here. Mainstream history tells you Juana suffered from mental illness. She screamed, raged, wandered hallways barefoot, tearing her clothes. But here's the open debate: was she truly mad? Or made to seem mad? Historians still argue whether Juana's insanity was hereditary or fabricated an excuse to lock her away and keep male hands on the crown. She had powerful brothers, uncles, a scheming father. Convenient. Right, her mother was famously ruthless, and her son Charles would later rule most of Europe. Juana didn't fit the plan, and in monarchies, people who don't fit get retired. You glance at a nearby letter, the ink barely legible. It's a note from Juana to her sister. Sweet, coherent, loving. Not exactly the ramblings of a lunatic. What if the madness was just grief? Twisted by a court eager to silence a grieving queen, she'd loved Philip desperately. He not so much. He cheated, openly, constantly. Juana chased his mistresses through palace halls, screaming. When he died suddenly, some say of typhoid. Others whisper poison. She lost the only thing she thought gave her value. Her obsession wasn't just about love. It was about control in a world where royal women had none. You move now through a different room, smaller, padded. The walls seem to hum. You're in Tordesillas, where Juana spent her last 46 years. 46. Locked away. Her ladies-in-waiting changed. Generations passed. And still she sat, whispering to a man who'd long since become bone. Her daughter Catherine visited sometimes, but even she eventually stopped. The portraits in the hall outside change as you drift past young Juana. Solemn and bright-eyed. Older Juana, eyes wider, gaze hollow. Then her children. Every one of them carries the weight of 2 clashing dynasties. One fringe historian once joked that Juana didn't go mad, she was just extremely overqualified for grief. It's half a joke, half a punch in the gut, because grief, in royal families, was dangerous. Too much of it and people start to think you're weak. Or worse, mad. Back in the dark chamber, Juana suddenly stands. She points out the narrow window slit. You see it now, torchlight flickering below. Her guards, loyal only to her son. She knows she'll never leave. She knows Philip is gone. But she also knows that she's remembered. And memory, for queens who couldn't rule, is the only crown that matters. Your breath fogs in the cool air as you pass a painted tile on the wall. It's chipped, but the image remains a crowned woman holding a heart. Not wearing it, holding it. The message is clear: rule with your heart, and they'll rip it from your hands. You step through another doorway and now you're in Burgundy. Decades earlier. The birthplace of Philip the Handsome. The air here smells of moss and spoiled wine. Philip's court is lavish. Golden, indulgent. But under the satin and perfume lies a gaping insecurity. His lineage is stacked with Habsburg marriages just like Juana's. He's beautiful. Sure. But his ancestors are whispering through his bloodstream, pressing their lips to his mind. His court doctor, an obscure figure named Meister Abel, once warned that Philip's blood ran too thick with itself. The note survives in one footnote in a regional archive, mostly ignored. But you can't stop thinking about it. Blood running too thick, like syrup, like consequence. You pass into a nursery. The cradle rocks. Inside it lies a baby wrapped in gold-threaded cloth. Charles V, the baby who would one day rule over Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, and parts of the Americas. All because 2 second cousins got married in the name of peace and dynasty. And Charles, he had the jaw, the famous one, but he also had the migraines, the gout, the jaw so misaligned he could barely close his mouth. He ruled half the world, but couldn't bite an apple. His own son, Philip II, would go on to marry his niece. And the cycle deepened. You're starting to see it. Aren't you each generation believing it could cheat nature? That it could squeeze out one more heir before the house of cards collapsed, and 'tis genes are patient. They wait. They stack. As the echo of Juana's lullaby fades into the walls. You wonder if she knew. If, in those last years in her tower, she felt the shadow of what her children would become. Monarchs, yes, but monsters too born of too little oxygen in the gene pool. And still, they built empires. You're standing now in front of a gilded mirror, but the reflection isn't yours. It's a baby barely a year old, cradled in silken ceremony. Its face slack, its head too large for the body it's in. A nurse murmurs in the corner, crossing herself. You're in Vienna, mid-1700s. The cradle belongs to a Habsburg infant born to Maria Theresa and Francis II cousins. Of course, the baby doesn't survive the month. You flinch as a breeze catches the curtain and briefly reveals the child's eyes wide, dark, unfocused. The line keeps thinning. Inbreeding? they called it, but you're starting to wonder if the term does it justice. This wasn't just biology, it was bureaucracy. A system. A belief that royal blood had to be preserved at all costs, even if that meant marrying nieces, nephews, uncles, and cousins 3 times over. Even if it meant watching your children wilt like overwatered flowers. You pass through a gallery, now it's sealing a kaleidoscope of Bourbon family trees. France is elite, so elegant in public, but deeply tangled in private. Louis XIV, the Sun King, shines from a giant portrait, his hand on a globe. But look closer, his mother and father were double first cousins. His wife was his second cousin, his blood already simmering in its own repetition, and yet he lived long 72 years. A historical fact that baffles some and delights others, but his descendants not so lucky. You ease into Versailles, that over-decorated monument to excess, and you can practically taste the powder in the air. Everything is perfection on the surface. Beneath it, syphilis, bone disease, cognitive decline. You peek into a corridor filled with young nobles, all dressed alike, all related. They flirt like strangers, but you know better. You've seen their family trees. By the time you get to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the bloodlines are so tangled it's a wonder their children could walk, let alone rule. Their son, the lost Dauphin, dies young, probably of tuberculosis, or maybe malnutrition. Historians still argue whether he died in prison or was smuggled out. Fringe theorists even claim he lived under a false name in Belgium. But what everyone agrees on is this: he was never going to be strong. Not with that pedigree, just a fringe tidbit. Rarely taught in school, Louis XIV kept a private ledger of royal defects not for public shaming, but for planning marriages. If you knew your cousin had a weak heart, you picked someone else for her. Unless she was pretty, then it didn't matter. You turned to Egypt, now yes, even farther back where the Ptolemies ruled like gods, marrying sister to brother as casually as a merchant arranging spices. Cleopatra herself was the product of at least 8 generations of sibling marriage. You think back to your high school textbook Cleopatra. Glamorous, seductive, brilliant, true but also possibly epileptic, likely infertile, and born into a genetic echo chamber that worshipped its own reflection. One of her brothers, Ptolemy XIII, died in his teens after a brief co-rule with her. The cause historians suspect drowning in battle, but others say seizure, or congenital weakness. Hard to know when every family member shared the same DNA like it was holy water. In one fringe temple carving, a high priest writes that Cleopatra's lineage was as perfect as Ra's light unbroken, untainted, indivisible. That kind of language doesn't just speak to pride, it screams of delusion. Even the gods, apparently, suffered from confirmation bias. Back in Europe, padded rooms are filling. You slip into one in Bavaria, where King Ludwig II stares at the ceiling, building castles in his mind. He's eccentric. They say, obsessed with Wagner, night swimming, solitude. But also, a Habsburg descendant, and heavily inbred. Was he mad or just sensitive in a world too brutal for poetry? Then there's Empress Elizabeth Sisi, his cousin. Stunning, tragic, compulsive about her weight, her appearance, her privacy. She married her cousin Franz Joseph. Their son, Rudolf, killed himself in what became known as the Meierling Incident. A royal suicide pact, complete with rifles and roses. The dynasty unravelled from inside. You're getting tired now, drifting, and maybe that's fitting, because these families didn't collapse in flames. They decayed slowly. From within, a crown gets passed, then it slips, a child stutters, a queen stops eating, and a king forgets names. One by one, the lights go out, and no one questions the pattern, not out loud, until finally there's no one left to crown. The martyrs or monsters question still lingers. Were these royals victims of circumstance of duty? You watch Juana cradle her dead husband again. You see Charles II drool onto royal silk. You hear the Bourbon princess pray for a child that never comes. These weren't villains. They were trapped. In castles. In titles. In blood. And now you wonder how far that blood reached. You flick on your bathroom light at midnight. You glance at your jaw. You think about that weird cousin your family never talks about. You trace your family tree. Find a loop you didn't notice before. One last whisper, this story isn't just ancient. That blood still runs, quietly, subtly, in surnames you don't question, in eyes that look too much like your own. And that's the part you carry to bed with you tonight. Let it go now, let it soften. You're no longer in a stone tower or a velvet-draped nursery. The candle smoke has cleared, and the portraits have faded. The halls are empty now. Just dust and memory. All those names, Juana, Charles, Ludwig, Cece, they've stepped off the stage. They've been asleep for centuries. And you're floating, gently, through silence. The weight of all that legacy, all that desperation to stay royal, is lifting, slowly. It was never yours to carry. It was never anyone's. Really, just a story, told in veins and vows, passed like a secret through wedding bands and whispered regrets. Your breath slows. You listen to that soft background hum, the fan, the quiet, the night outside your window. It's all still here, waiting for you. Maybe you'll dream of palaces tonight, of carriages on marble, of silk gowns that rustle like leaves. But you'll know better. You'll see the story under the lace. You'll remember the cost of crowns too tightly held. You're safe now. There's no more torchlight, no more broken lullabies. Just the warmth of your own bed, your own life, your own name. And if, by chance, you wake tomorrow and find your reflection a little unfamiliar, just smile gently. That's probably nothing.